Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of The Open Shelf. We're going to have a little bit of a talk about a book called Measure What Matters. Something that we've all got to deal with at the moment is a very interesting climate as a professional with the tech industry. What we have is a lot of economic headwinds. Budgets are getting tighter, hiring's getting frozen, yet delivery deadlines for some reason just keep accelerating. And this is very hard to manage because there's also a lot of communication chaos, if we want to call it that. We now sit on, at least for me, 10 years worth of legacy Power BI dashboards with KPIs absolutely everywhere. And the question that becomes, what do we need to look at if we manage our tech teams, and how can we sort of navigate this very interesting economic climate for us? Now, the book Measure What Matters focuses on the concept of objective key results, or OKRs for short, which is a very lightweight shared language that essentially allows you to have a sharp focus, surfaces some of these capacity constraints for us, and then also turns fuzzy ambition into more of a learning loop that can support you through navigating these troubled times that we're currently in. And yes, sometimes it's very high level with regards to executive teams, but there's so much value that you can get out of it to help your technical team succeed. To join us in this conversation, it's not just me, Pedram, who's been working in data platforms for a couple of years, that really likes Measure What Matters, because, come on, I work in data. Who doesn't like measuring things? From MBOs to OKRs to KPIs, these are the kind of things that we work with on a daily basis. And I think the book gives us such a cool context. We also have Mehdi, my lovely co-host.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 6th episode. I'm really excited about this chapter as well. Measure What Matters is among one of my most favorite books when it's come to books in regard to management, leadership, and managing the organization in large. This book is one of a kind. It's not only discussing about this approach, which is OKR, but bring really tangible example within the book that's set in real works how it's unfold. From really a small startup that they find their ways through really enterprise like Google, which they embrace OKR from the embryonic stage, and they unfold it in a way that they become tenfolds over and over again based on Larry Page that he mentioned at the foreword of this book, and so many more examples that we have in this book. It is a really interesting book, and I'm really excited about this chapter. And we have our honored guest as well, Ped, which I had pleasure working with him about 5 years while I was working in Monster.com. And he have been in this industry for quite a while, a different role from, I believe, software engineer up to CTO. I'll pass it to Pet to give us a little bit of introduction and also why he liked this book.
Great. Thanks for the warm welcome, Mehdi and Willem. I appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts on this book. Like Mehdi said, I've been involved in a hands-on capacity in software development, as well as a leadership capacity across companies that were very small, less than 10 people, all the way up to Fortune 500s, et cetera, and then everything in between. And in that time, I've had the opportunity to work with many different frameworks for objective management, everything from, obviously KPIs that everyone's used, BOs formerly were something that a company I worked for, Monster, in fact, used to use in the old days. And then the ever popular Nothing, which is the default framework for a lot of companies, until about 7 years ago, where the company I worked at, my boss decided to buy every department head this book and insisted that we all read it because we're going to implement OKRs as soon as possible. And I've been a convert ever since then. And this book was the basis of my learning about it. So I'm a big fan of it as well.
Awesome. When we talk a little bit about Measure What Matters, we're going to focus, it's wide. So we're going to try and focus on at least 3 core principles for today. Those of our listeners that's watched episode 4 know we do a little bit of chapter-based things, and we're going to follow the same structure here for this episode as well. So we plan to release it in 3 chapters. The first chapter is primarily going to be about trust and transparency, where it's all about putting culture first and metrics second. second. Chapter 2 is going to be about focused prioritization, which again, in today's day and age, is very, very valuable for us. So meaning that every strategic yes essentially does stand on many clear no's, unfortunately. And then the third chapter is going to be about data-driven learning and ambition. It's numbers alone don't really inspire, but learning from them does. And to finish us off with the introduction, I thought it would be quite interesting. The first section of the book talks about Peter Drucker. And I thought in today's day and age where we have a very jaded view of just what we have to deal with on a daily basis, I really, really like this extract from him, where he says essentially that he conceived a new management idea. The whole idea being that it needs to be results driven, yet humanistic. A corporation, he wrote, should be a community built on trust and respect for the workers and not just a profit machine. And this was the fundamental basics of how he formulated MBOs, or management by objective, which does have a couple of caveats, but I think it's a nice preface to sort of start us up there. Then, without further ado, let's dig into it.
Within chapter 1 of our episode, we are going to discuss a little bit about culture and how culture can make or break OKRs. Like within this book, John Doerr mentioned that OKR are not silver bullet. They are not substitute for sound judgment or a strong leadership or creative work culture. But if all those are in place, OKR are tools to guide you to the mountaintop. And we are going to discuss about culture aspect of the OKR. What is prerequisite when it comes to OKR to be able to implement it? Because within the industry, I hear over and over again that OKR does not work for our ecosystem. OKR is only meant for big organization, and this kind of preconceived notion that is not correct. And we want to discuss about it. What are the prerequisites, especially when it's come to culture aspect? What's your take on that?
So for me, it comes back to a very interesting concept or example that they used with the Measure What Matters, the book itself, is Intel's Operation Crash. Again, you need to have just set the perspective here of what the book and the context that it's talking about with regards to Intel. So Intel in that stage, where it was the 1981 to 1983, it faced a lot of competition out there with regards to chip manufacturing. It also had very much shrinking margins at that point in time. So it necessitated that there was a very, very targeted effort that has a high velocity internally from its teams. And this is essentially where OKRs made a big difference for them. And it was so interesting to go through it because it flows into this cultural aspect with regards to how the book describes it is a preface of how the culture needed to be communicated that, listen, we need to get somewhere. This is where we need to go. And these are the things that we are going to use to measure how far we're getting to that specific objective. That's why I kind of like the concept of OKRs, because it gives you this framework in example form. I actually only this morning opened the physical book. I've only listened to the audiobook. And when I opened the physical book, I'm like, crap, they actually have like little excerpts with regards to how the OKR should look and structured as images as well. And that's what I really like about the book, is that it gives you that initial building blocks that helps you on this journey to put this foundational cultural element in there. How about for you, Ped?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think from a formal perspective, the way I look at OKRs, like any other framework or any other approach to managing and aligning the efforts of a team, you kind of, in some certain situations, it's kind of a foot gun, right? You give someone a gun and they might shoot themselves in the foot, regardless of how good or well-intentioned or otherwise the system is. So for me, the kind of key thing here is, what is the culture of your company? What's your mission, vision, your values? And holistically, every time you write an objective, not necessarily the key results, because those can be instructional rather than directional. But as far as the objectives themselves, my experience is when first introducing this concept to teams, they have a lot of difficulty in what is an objective compared to a key result. Why is one measured and the other one not? And, a lot of mechanical questions. But for me, basically, it comes down to this: is you look at that objective and you have trouble clearly aligning it with something from either your mission, your vision, or your company values, then either you need to go through an exercise where you rewrite those, like maybe, over time things have shifted, or if you're confident in your mission, vision, and values, then maybe you need to reconsider that objective. So that's kind of the guardrails on the road with OKRs, is keeping you aligned. It's not just, there's no point to be aligned together if we're all going in the wrong direction. You have to be aligned together to go in the right direction. And to me, that culture that you alluded to, it's already defined in your mission, vision, values, using.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one also of the comments that I always get when it comes to something like key results is that everybody's always wrong. Why are we looking at this specific key result at this specific point in time? And then we've had this key result now for, let's say, the better part of 12 months. But what I like about OKRs is that it accepts the fact culturally that it is short term and that it will change, essentially, because as a group of people, as a community, as a leadership team, the company faces different pressures at different times during the year. Things happen. And I like that about them being very honest about OKR, saying that, listen, if the winds change, you need to adapt as well. And you need to make sure that you communicate that kind of adaptation to the rest of your teams as well. And I think this is also one of the interesting parts, maybe, that we spoke about at length when we started discussing the book a little bit with regards to removing compensation from OKRs so that you don't have that bias directly baked into number go up or number go down, but that you sort of understand that that's part of the culture, in that it is something that is important now, but it might not be important tomorrow, or it might be twice as important tomorrow, depending on how that works. What do you reckon, Eddie? You had some good points there.
Right. This is something that the book emphasized on it, that OKR need to be decoupled from compensation. And it was a transition from like MBO to OKR. MBO was the model that Peter Drucker introduced. And after that, Andy Grove really kicked it off to another level. Like when it's come to focus, MBO focus on what, but when it's come to OKR, it's not only what, but they want to do how as well. When it's come to cadence, it's MBO is annual basis, but OKR is like quarterly basis. When it's come to access, MBO was mainly private and OKR was public and transparent. That really huge shift over here that bring the cultural aspect even, highlighted even more, that people, they see each other goal and even they try to help each other or build on top of each other goal, connect to each other and help each other to bring it to different direction. And when it was coming to directional, it was MBO was top down, however OKR is bottom up and sideways. Compensation, MBO was tied to compensation, but OKR, they emphasize that it need to be divorced and should not be coupled at all. And when it's come to aspirational aspect of OKR really want to go aggressive and aspirational, but MBO was risk averse. The transition was quite significant, that from MBO to OKR. And if you see, the cultural aspect is also tangible over here. Because if you don't have that cultural transparency, is not part of your culture, OKR ain't gonna work. Not because OKR cannot work, because your environment is not built for it. If you cannot really go for aspirational aspect of it, it is something that OKR needs it. If everything is green, something is wrong. John Doerr was mentioning, said we need more red, we need more yellow. So we show that the aim was high enough. It wasn't easy. That's why this is something that is quite important within the culture, that it's welcomed rather than, stay away from it.
I agree. And I mean, who wants to do a moonshot if you've got no safety net, right? But I mean,
exactly.
Ed, you mentioned that you've worked in so many sizes of organizations. So the question for me always, and I think would be very interesting for our listeners, is there certain cultural elements that you've experienced that either derailed or saved a very ambitious metric, even in the ones that maybe don't have OKRs, but where you've seen something that just culturally just clicked for you?
Yeah, so I think the most important common aspect to those situations where I saw OKRs really succeed is where the people at the highest point of the organization, number one, got behind it, and number two, measured themselves using OKRs. Because I've also seen it where they're earnestly, let's say the CEO, the board, whoever, ultimately holds sway, they could earnestly want OKRs to be the enabler that it promises to be under in certain conditions, but then they refuse to utilize OKRs for their own, alignment and road mapping and measurement, if you will. And so when people see that, it kind of paints a picture of this is good for you, but I'm different, I'm better, or something like that, right? So I think that's a pretty bad scenario. And I've seen that, and I've seen it then cause OKRs to fail miserably. In fact, what they do is, the board or the C levels, they're going to measure themselves on KPIs. They might even call those KPIs OKRs, but in reality, they're KPIs. And what it does is it devalues everyone else's OKRs into KPIs, because they're going to look to the top and be like, I'm going to emulate that. They're doing that, so that must be the right way. And it even led to a situation where all those OKRs, KPIs really, were being cascaded downwards, just like a KPI would be, right? So yeah, that's the biggest commonality is exactly that, is that the leadership buys in and utilizes it themselves. And then that's when you stand a really good chance of having the organization. I mean, look, at the end of the day, OKRs to me, we look at the tech organization, almost every company I've worked at in the last, 15, 20 years, somewhere in that neighborhood, Agile has been the way, right? No one wants to do waterfall anymore. There are certain situations where you want to do it, but for the most part, when you're building new features, when you're building new products, you want to be agile. You want to be reactive to what the market sentiment is as you're deploying features, as you're building up costs, et cetera. And so KPIs or even MBOs from a structured perspective don't quite mesh or align with an agile methodology. And this, Mehdi, goes back to what you were saying around that moonshot, right? Having those aspirational goals, that's agile by definition. Like if tomorrow we find a new fact and it means we take a 90-degree turn left, we take that 90-degree turn. We don't worry that, hey, I already have a KPI and it says I go straight and we can only adjust it at the end of this quarter when we review. None of that. So I think that's also another big factor for me, is that alignment of, okay, you're doing agile as a methodology between your product and engineering team. Now let's use OKRs to manage the overall alignment across those two teams, of course, but ideally across all departments, operations, marketing, sales, what have you.
Yes. And I completely agree with you there. For me, the Google Analytics always falls into this bucket. Google Analytics data is essentially the guide rails for any marketing organization with regards to a modern e-commerce stack. The problem with that is, if you're not chasing a specific objective with regards to taking that data, extracting it, bringing it into your own infrastructure, aggregating that, building KPIs on top of that, making sense of the data, doing some predictive analysis on top of it, without having it attached to a clear objective that you're doing, it's very expensive as well. I've seen IT budgets just absolutely explode because click-through rate is important. Why? We don't know. That's the KPI, number go up. That's basically it. And I agree with you there, because there's so much work that a technical team needs to put in to make these metrics visible to the rest of the organization, and has a very severe knock-on effect with regards to capacity and costs. At least when you have an objective there, everybody knows what we're chasing. But more importantly for me as well, you have something to challenge. If you're in any sort of architecture within the architecture ladder, one of the things that you deal with today is cost constraints. So having a clear objective where you can stand in front of a leadership board or senior leadership board and say, listen, I know the objective is a 10% uptick in whatever that might be, but it's going to cost us 6 months of development effort and about 500,000 euro to get there. Is it now still worth it now that we know pursuing this? And it might be, it might not be, but at least then it's a very open flow of transparent information that I think OKR sort of like help as well. What about for you, Mehdi? I mean, what works culturally?
Yeah, within this book, John Doerr was discussing about it, that Andy Grove also was big fan of Maslow hierarchy. And he was really a strong believer that this Maslow hierarchy need to be in place. They need to be secure when it comes to security. They need to have the love, or in order to get to the self-actualization, or that challenging things will be relevant. Because if you are not having the basic element, or those basic element is not within the organization, it's not going to work. And they elaborated pretty well with the examples that they had within the book. That in one of the example, they was mentioning that they had this kind of OKR, but it was superficial. And people, they were just mentioning, okay, it's done, or something like that. But when they really challenge them, and when they bring the culture that, hey, keep us as executive accountable for what we are saying, and especially CEO is someone that you want to challenge. And the extreme example that they was mentioning within the book, within Intel, somebody, whistleblower, come and say, hey, you Turkeys don't know what's going on in the market. They take that feedback and they really see there are some fundamental problem and they act upon it. Or is it your organization capable of getting that kind of feedback? And it's quite important to see the organization is enabling people to voice out when they say something, or they killing the messenger, or welcoming the bad news and act upon it. These are all really important points from my perspective.
So, Ped, question. If you could give if you could go back a couple of years and you could give yourself as a team leader just one or two tips with regards to cultures and OKRs within your team, what's like one or two things that you would focus more on, and maybe a thing that you would focus less on?
Well, I think there's things that you figure out eventually anyway. So ideally, if I could do something to figure those out as soon as possible. So using your example of, the click-through rates, for example, from an analytics perspective, what's driving that? And is that really the right place to focus, et cetera? From a big picture perspective, I could care less about click-through rates. What I care about is sales, right? Yes. At the end of the day. Now, if you look at the sales funnel, click-through is the big ring on the, this the first stage, right? So of course, if we maximize click-through, then that should have a trickle-down effect of maximizing sales. But can I, an engineer, really have a major impact on click-through? Probably not. That's probably more a marketing function, researching, where's the best place to spend the advertisement dollars. Maybe there's some refinement to the, marketing materials themselves, the content in some way, or the pricing might need to be adjusted. Whatever it is that, they can focus on that area. But I guess to get to your question, the advice I would give is step one, figure out like what is really the important objective here. Sales. And for most commercial enterprises, that's what it comes down to. It's something sales related to sales, essentially. And then work backwards, figure out that funnel, that sales funnel that, and what are the different stages. Now, as a department head, whether you're in engineering, marketing, sales itself, operations, wherever you are, figure out which stages in that sales funnel that you and your team can have the biggest impact, and now make those your objectives. Right. So I'm not adding an objective to increase click-through rate, because I'm in tech. What I need to do is make sure that the site is working smoothly, that any customer that wants to buy can buy and never get an error page, and things are super fast because people are impatient. They'll run away.
Only care about the nines, right?
Yeah, exactly. The many, many nines that we need to put in place. So that's, I guess, the advice I would give is figure out the big picture. Then in that big picture, slice it up and see which slice you can actually have the biggest impact. And that makes it so easy to write objectives and key results.
Solid advice. I also like the fact that the book talks a lot about transparency. And I think this is something, once you make that a core of what you want to support as a team, make it transparent, live it, put that badge on your shoulder. There's nothing wrong with it. But I think it's quite empowering for the team to know that this is visible, and anybody can sort of just go in and have a look and see, how am I contributing to what's important to my community of people and the ship that I'm currently sailing, right?
Right. And also, like John Doerr was advocating about this book, how we do everything means everything, by Dov Seidman, that describe the culture and how culture can shape the behavior. And when it's replacing the rule with these shaped purposes, it's kind of governs. I came across this in different sources as well, that they mentioned if the culture is clear, people, they know what they're expected from them. That kind of top-down model and command and control need to be there, because the culture itself governs the decision that need to be made. And people, they can make the decision without approval. Like the example that we had in the book was the Intel, when they wanted to go with the campaign that they had, and it took them 2 weeks to really kick off the campaign. And they were talking about to one executive in Motorola.
From Motorola, yeah. That was a good one.
Exactly. Within the Motorola, they was mentioning the culture is quite different over there. If I want to approve a ticket from Chicago to Arizona, is going to take me more than these 2 weeks that you guys kick off your campaign. And it shows also culture, how is enabler for the team and for the organization.
I think it's one of those fundamental underpinnings for OKRs as well. I would say, does it stop you as a team lead or middle level management maybe to try something? No, not necessarily, but holy crap, if you get that right within a total organization, it's quite a powerful thing to have there.
Exactly. And like also within Good to Great, Jim Collin discuss about bringing the right people into organization. Like it's make an example as a boss, bringing the right people within the boss, make sure they are on the right seat, then you can drive wherever you want to go. Within this chapter, we unfold what is important about culture and how culture is prerequisite for like bringing OKR to real organization and make it kick off. We discuss about a couple of books, which you can see over here. And also we are going to put it within our video description, and looking forward to see you in the next episode. Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Goodbye.